Here is a video about chapter 3 in which I'd like to emphasize some of the really key concepts. I will try to be brief, but this is a topic that I love, so I'll probably go on for too long, and so I will apologize in advance. Okay, we're going to look at culture, and then we're going to look at co-culture, because a lot of students will say to me, "Well, I don't have a culture." Everyone does. If we look at the definition that Larry Samovar and his colleagues came up with, it is language, values, beliefs, traditions, and customs that are shared and learned. And then it says culture is a matter of perception and definition. It's how you perceive yourself, how you define yourself. Okay, so of course you belong to a culture. We think of culture as being something exotic. Well, people in China or in Ecuador or in Namibia have a culture, but we don't because we're just Americans. And let's definitely take a look at that. But before I go on to talk about cultures or co-cultures, let's take a look at the idea of social norms. I find it very interesting that the textbook kind of implies that there are norms, but never takes the time to define it. Now, if you've taken sociology, possibly psychology, you will have looked at norms. But basically, norms are the rules, the values, the behaviors that a group of people share and that we follow. It can be the norms of your family, can be the norms of your town, your school, your group of fantasy football players, I have no idea what people do. You belong to, I'm drawing a blank, a badminton tournament. Okay, they're not. So we understand what laws are. They're the rules that are codified. They're very clear. They are written down. We know what the consequences are if we break them. In an organization, we have rules that are possibly when you were hired, you were shown the list and you understand what the consequences are if you break them. For example, within a college course, there are very strict rules about plagiarism, which is passing off someone else's work as your own. It's stated under student conduct, and we know that what the consequences are. Norms tend to be unspoken. Well, how do we come up with norms? Well, it's people in this group think that whatever is a norm, it's normal, it's appropriate. And we tend to learn norms very early in life. If we follow the norms, we get rewarded. If we break a norm, there's punishment, which is sometimes being excluded from the group. Sometimes, people give us the silent treatment. And shoot, there was something I was going to say, and it came and it went. Well, it'll come to me, and we'll talk about it. We will talk about it in class. So this is a very important concept that I don't know why the textbook doesn't cover it. Okay. Within a culture, there are co-cultures, but a lot of times I wanted to talk about the in-group and out-group. So an in-group, any group that you belong to is your in-group. And people who do not belong to that group, that they are members of an out-group. It has nothing to do with the cool kids and the people who aren't. So you are all students. That is one of your in-groups. I am not a student, so I would be, if you look at me, you would see me as a member of an out-group. I might be, my in-group would be college professors, and you guys would be in my out-group. But we could conceptualize the group as people discussing interpersonal communication. And so we'd be in the in-group in that case, and an out-group would be everyone who's not doing that. Okay. And then, excuse me, the social identity. We'll talk about social identity much more in chapter 4 when we're looking at identity, but it is the part of the self-concept that is based on your membership in a specific group, which makes sense, I guess. Co-cultural theory, I hope to talk about this in class. If you, people who belong to a culture, when they move and they become a member of another culture, they have three choices of what they can do. They can assimilate, they can accommodate, or they can separate. So assimilate basically means you just blend in. You dive whole hog into this new culture. To accommodate is you fit in, you maybe do what's appropriate in the culture, but you still hang on to who you are. And separate would be, in a sense, you keep yourself separate from the culture. When I think of, okay, and we'll talk about this more in class, I just wanted to make sure that you look at these points and you make sure that you understand this vocabulary, because it's really crucial to this topic. Okay, so what does it mean when we say intercultural communication? And it's when members of different cultures or co-cultures are exchanging messages, and those messages are influenced by their cultural perception. Okay, can be verbal, can be nonverbal. And the textbook, I think, does a good job of giving, there's a chart on page 63 that talks about, here's communication. Is it intercultural or is it not intercultural? So just because, so I'm in an in-group, you're in the in-group of, last week when we were talking about social media, you could be in a group of TikTok users, and I am not. So if we're talking about TikTok or Snapchat or Discord, I sort of kind of know what they are, but I don't use them. So if we're trying to talk about that, we are actually engaged in intercultural communication, because I do not belong to that co-culture. Again, we could talk about this much more in class. So a point that is brought up is, when you have two people, we have people from different cultures who are communicating, we're trying to figure out, is this communication intercultural or is it not intercultural? Or they say, is it non-cultural? And you have to say is, how significant is this? Okay, so we're talking about social media and we're talking about texting. We speak the same language in a sense, so that would be non-cultural. But when we're talking about that, Snapchat, TikTok, Discord, I didn't even know anything else that I just don't do, Reddit, that is forming kind of the basis of what we're talking about. Then our cultural differences are salient. That's the noun. No, I'm sorry. That's the verb. That is the adjective. It's salient. It's important. Okay, it's significant. Sometimes, and so they use the term salient in the textbook. Okay. This is my favorite, potentially my favorite part of the chapter. It has to do with cultural values and norms. I'm assuming we're going to spend some time talking about this, because the idea that different cultures have different values and different norms is what is at the heart of issues with communication. It's far more than the fact of language. It's more, as I say, it's values and norms, it's attitudes. Okay, so definitely we're going to talk about, I'm going to say the first two for sure. High context versus low context, which is an idea that Edward Hall, who was an anthropologist, came up with. I mean, the concept existed. He came up with the words to define it. And then the individualistic versus the, collectivistic culture. What follows below is the work of Geert Hofstede. There is In the supplemental material, there's a link to his website where he talks about these. Well, he's got 6 now. I find it fascinating. I hope you do too. But in any case, we will talk mostly about the top 2 because those are, I would say, are potentially the 2 that cause the biggest problems in communication. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is to think about these 5. Where do you, this is the culture that you are identifying with. I don't know if we can talk about, I'm putting this in air quotes, standard US culture. Does that actually exist? Are we high context or low context? Well, I'll tell you, we are low context. We use words to express what we mean. We tend not to rely too much, although we do some, on nonverbal. Okay? So, do you communicate in that same way? Are you maybe a person who is more high context, but you're living in a low context culture? So you can go through this because I would really like to discuss this in class. Okay. When we look at co-cultures, although this is not all of them, we are looking at things such as race, ethnicity, we should move intersectionality, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, generation, ability, disability, socioeconomic status. Those frequently are what people use. Like let's do age and generation. Okay, what generation do you belong to? And when you are talking to someone who belongs to a different generation, do you ever feel like you are speaking different languages? So, and that happens quite a bit, right? That people who are from different generations have different values and different norms of behavior, and that could cause a lot of issues. Okay. I don't want to talk about intersectionality right now because I can see that the video is getting long, but that is definitely a topic I would like to discuss in class. And so, something else to think about. Identify your co-cultural memberships. Can you come up with between 5 to 10 different groups that you belong to? And then come up with co-cultures that you don't belong to. And then think about the criteria you and others in your life use to define, what is your co-culture? What is your in-group? What is your out-group? And I'm asking you to think about this before class so that we can discuss this a little bit in class. And obviously, if you have questions about this, please ask. So I want to make sure you're clear on this. Okay. Last slide. How can you make sure, or what are the things that you can do to improve your intercultural communication competence? And remember, it doesn't mean you are talking to people from a different continent who speak a different language than you. It can also be that you are talking to people from a different co-culture. So when you look at this list, do you see some similarities from the communication competence assessment that you did? Okay. Let's see. We've got motivation, we got attitude, we got knowledge, we got skill, and they've added a couple of more. Okay. Open-mindedness. Some people can go into a situation that they're unfamiliar with and kind of accept it for what it is, as opposed to saying, this is different from what I know, and different means wrong. Okay. We're also looking at the issue of mindfulness versus mindlessness. I don't. What can we say about this? Are you? It's kind of. I would look at this as more like self-monitoring. Are you paying attention to what people are doing, and kind of measuring your behavior against their behavior? And the last one is this patience and perseverance. This is especially people who have spent some time in a different culture. I would like to have a discussion about the idea of how you were able to move from culture shock to adaptation. I could talk probably the entire 3 hours about my experiences living in a couple of different cultures, but I don't want to. I want to hog it all. Okay, so this is just an overview. Uh, Please read the textbook carefully. Bring any questions you have. Put in the pre-course survey and make sure you do it before class. That's why it's called pre-class. It really needs to be done early so I have a chance to prepare. And bring your questions to class, because even though I do try to make sure that I have worked into class the questions that people have, sometimes one escapes me. So I look forward to class on Wednesday. It potentially will go a little long because there's a lot to talk about. But anyways, uh, see you on Wednesday.